Canadians could do anything as well as Americans, if not better.
This is the story of one man's dream, to bring Canadian music to the world. It's the story of Al Mair and the company that he co-founded, Attic Records. Al's music business journey began while working in a Toronto record store, when one Canadian artist in particular caught his attention.
Jack Scott. We kept telling the record company, stop pushing Leroy and turn the record over, you're pushing the wrong side. So when Leroy peaked, and I think it peaked top 10, they turned it over to My True Love, and that went on to be a #1 for Jack.
It was Capitol Records of Canada that gave Al his first music industry job.
I had had 1 2-hour accounting lesson the night before, credit, debit, that was all I knew. And I got hired as a royalty accountant. I did that for about 6 months, and the desk next to mine was the promotion department desk, and I had to reconcile their accounts every month. So I got my finger into promotion and what they were spending money on and posters and what have you. And then I got promoted out of accounting into sales and sales promotion.
After 2 years with Capitol, Al moved on to London Records, but that didn't last long.
The franchisee for Ontario for London Records used to run a cigar store in Parkdale, and he still ran the record company like he was running a cigar store. For example, I was to call a radio station, play them a record over the phone. If they liked it and said they would play it, I could send it to them. If they said send it to us, and I did, and they didn't play it, they expected me to ask them to send the record back. At that time, records cost about 15 cents to manufacture, so the idea of asking a radio station to return a record was absolutely foolish. And in my 7 days tenure at London Records, I was fired twice, rehired twice, and quit.
The Campo Company was Al Mair's next stop, and it was at Campo that he connected with an up-and-coming performer named Gordon Lightfoot.
We being Campo, represented United Artists in Canada, and Gordon was signed to United Artists, and we put out 5 albums, all of which would be considered platinum or double platinum albums.
The concept for Attic Records was sparked by a trip to Montreal in 1967.
My passion for Canadian artists, I would say, goes back to Expo 67. I had previously been to the New York World's Fair in New York City in 62, and I looked at what Canada had done and said, hey, we can do anything at least as well as the Americans or anybody else, if not better. And at that point, it convinced me this is the time that Canadian artists deserve to get proper exposure. And that was the nucleus that led eventually to Attic Records.
In 1968, 6 years before the launch of Attic Records, Al Mair became Gordon Lightfoot's manager. Working with the singer-songwriter was another step in fulfilling Al's ultimate dream.
I realized during my period in management that this isn't what I wanted to do. I really wanted to run a record company. And a friend of mine who I had got a position at Warner Brothers Records, Tom Williams, we used to have a drink in a bar after seeing an act perform and say, gee, if we had our own company, how we'd do it differently. And he called me one Friday afternoon and said, if we're ever going to have a record company, it's got to be now, because I just quit. He quit Friday. On Saturday, my wife typed out a business plan Tom and I wrote. My accountant came over on Sunday, and then on Monday it went looking for money, and fortunately Tuesday found investors and raised $300,000.
While Al took Attic Records through its growing pains, he remained Gordon Lightfoot's manager.
Sat down with Lightfoot and said, this is what I want to do, and I'll make a deal with you. I'll charge you half what I've been charging you, and I'll continue to do it. And if the record company becomes successful, I'll give you 6 months notice when I'm going to leave. And if you're unhappy, give me 6 months notice. So we did that, and a year and a half later I gave him notice and went full-time with the record company.
Attic Records was officially launched in 1974. The first act signed was the band Flood. Right out of the gate, Flood's debut Attic album cover caused a bit of a problem.
The cover was a side view of a pregnant woman's stomach, quite extended. Sam, the record man's wife, thought it was a breast and said, "We can't get behind that record." So we made up some posters of it, and we of course issued a press release about it being banned and got people talking about it and wanting to see this banned album cover. And it was a fairly successful record, and out of Flood, of course, came Gatto.
One of Attic's early successes came from a chance meeting during Al's annual trip to Madem, the music industry conference in France.
There's this quiet gentleman sitting there much of the time, and I sat down and introduced myself. "Hi, I'm Al Mair," and he says, "Hi, I'm Haygood Hardy." I asked him what he was doing there, and he said, "I wrote this Salada tea commercial, and it created a lot of interest, and people were calling radio stations and tracing it down to the ad agency who did it. And Kellogg's wanted to keep all these people who went to that trouble happy, so they paid to record the Homecoming and press it as a single. And anybody who bothered to trace it down to Kellogg's Salada, they would send them a free single." And Haygood played it for me, and it was a very pleasant song. And I said, "I like this." He said, "Well, I took it to all the major record companies in Canada. None of them were interested." So I said, "I'm interested." Gave him my card, said, "Call me when you get back." And fortunately, he did. The Homecoming was a huge hit. He was Instrumental Artist of the Year in the United States. We were double platinum in Canada. We cracked the top 40 in the US.
Next came triumph after triumph.
Two guys came to us, Gil Moore and Mike Levine, the drummer and bass player, and they said they'd like to become the next Rush. And they found a lead singer, and he would join them if they got a record contract. But in the interim, he wouldn't join them. So they said, basically, "Would you give us a record contract without hearing anything, seeing anything, just based on faith?" So we said yes. They got Rick Emmett in as the lead singer, and they went out and they toured for about 9 months, and then came and said, "Okay, we're ready to make an album." So we made an album just called Triumph, put it out, and I went shopping it in the US.
To try and land a U.S. contract for Triumph, Attic had several American record executives fly in for a special concert at Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens.
We had 9 American A&R vice presidents up here. The show was great. Triumph killed. The next morning, they were all flying back to New York, as was my lawyer, and all of them were in business class except one, the vice president of RCA Records. He was at the back of the plane. His company was not doing well, and they didn't fly business class. The Globe and Mail reviewed Triumph. It was a scathing review, which was to be expected. But up in business class, where they got the free newspapers, they're passing around the review in the Globe and Mail of Triumph, and all. If any of them had interest, it died. They would not let their peers see them signing this band. Back in the back of the plane, the RCA guy didn't get any free newspaper. He just sat there and thought about it and said, "I saw 10,000 screaming kids last night. We don't have anything like Triumph. I want Triumph." And Triumph went on, had, I believe, 5 gold records in the US.
One of Attic Records' biggest successes happened in 1980, thanks to the Irish Rovers.
The Rovers and their manager, I worked closely with them, and they had said, "If you ever start your own company, we'd like to be involved." So when I started Attic, I called the Rovers manager. We introduced him to Jack Richardson, who had produced the Guess Who and Bob Seger and others. And they had a song written by Tom Paxton called "Wasn't That a Party?" And they played it for Jack, and he says this is great, and they recorded it, and it turned out wonderfully. So the Rovers said, "Well, we're shareholders, it should come out on Attic." And our first thought was, it's difficult. The Irish Rovers had one hit, and everybody relates the Irish Rovers to St. Patrick's Day only, and the only airplay we would get would be on March 17th. So we convinced them to drop the word Irish, and we put it out as the Rovers.
Another important Attic signing was the legendary Downchild Blues Band.
Well, we signed Downchild, and the first album we did was called We Deliver, which looked like a pizza box, and you opened it, and there's a picture of the pizza, and there's the grease on the cover, and we won Juno Award for the Best Album Design of the Year.
In 1983, Al's business partner Tom Williams retired from Attic. Al Mair successfully ran the company until 1999, when he sold Attic to a group of investors who merged it with several existing companies. By spring 2001, Attic Records no longer existed.
I think Attic would have survived if I hadn't sold it. I think we would have been smart enough to get through the current music industry recession. We did have 114 gold, platinum, and multi-platinum albums from the US, the UK, Japan, Holland, and of course Canada.